if you don't mind, our usual routine about 45-50 minutes. Yeah. And then we'll have questions and answers. And because it's online, it'll be a bit more difficult for people to ask questions in the process. So we propose that they will be posting their questions in the chat. So you'll be able to see what questions are being asked. Just check your chat every once in a while. And if you feel like answering these questions immediately, feel free. But other than that, you have all the questions asked before the end of your presentation. I'll review them and answer these questions, okay?
Sure, thank you.
Well, that will work. Okay, perfect. So let's wait another couple of minutes and then we will proceed.
Once we start, could you please remind people to sign up in chart?
Of course, yes, I remember that. Will do. Thanks.
Yeah, great.
Nice collection of books, Francisco.
No.
Oh wow, yeah, quite impressive.
I don't have my books here. I don't bring them to Russia, so I had to use this virtual background.
Is it just a back? I think it's just a background, right?
Yeah, just a background.
Okay, all right.
So, I know, I was just kidding.
But it's a very pro.
I just brought my e-reader with me, so
I see. Yeah, that's practical. All it takes, of course, right. In your reading, most of the reading that you do, is it in Spanish or is it in English or it's both? Or
I think it's in English.
It's in English, right? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think it's time to start. Good evening, everyone. My name is Leonid Polishuk. I will chair the next session of the Center for Institutional Studies Research Seminar. Let me start with an announcement. We would like to keep track of who is attending this seminar. So if you can please sign in the chat part of this conference. So identify yourself in the chat, your name and whereabouts if necessary. Today we are quite fortunate to have Francisca Cabrera Hernandez, who is a postdoc at the Center for Institutional Studies. His topic is on intergenerational childcare, full-time schools, and grandmothers' labor supply. Francisca has been with us for quite some time as a postdoc research fellow. He has impressive educational credentials, holds a PhD from the University of Sussex, but also degrees in public administration and journalism. Apart from his academic jobs, he had several high-profile public policy and consulting appointments with various international development and assistance programs. He is mostly a development economist with main focus on education and, as I said, intergenerational childcare, full-time schools, and grandmothers' labor supply. I propose that we proceed as follows. Francisco will deliver his presentation. If you have questions, please ask those again in the chat column. And it will be up to Francisco to decide whether these questions would be answered in the process of his presentation or after that presentation. Once the presentation is over, there will be a question, answers, and comments period, as always. So Francisco, the floor is yours. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for being here for this presentation. So this paper is written We just started writing this paper like 2 or 3 months ago. We've been working on these topics for a good while, but this is very much work in progress. So I will be very happy with your comments on how we can improve our research. This is with Maria Padilla Romo. She's an assistant professor at the University of Tennessee at Knoxville in the US. The reason why we are interested in this topic is that because grandparents are very likely to provide grandchildcare in many economies, moreover in those in which there aren't many formal institutions of childcare. And the reason why this happens is because they are an inexpensive, flexible, and reliable source of childcare. This is good for young parents because young parents can just leave their children with their own parents and they are sure that they will be cared with love, but this is not very good for grandparents in one thing about it in economical terms, because they can be pulled from labor, either at intensive or extensive margin, and it can actually induce early retirement as well. And this could be even worse for grandmothers because, as we know, cultural roles, cultural differences put more burden on women on taking care of young children and child rearing as well. And also, on average, their opportunity costs are lower. And this is why most of the burden of child rearing goes to mothers. This takes more relevance in economic terms if one thinks that the average age to become a grandmother is actually not that high. For example, in Eastern Europe, including Russia, is around 47 years. In Mexico, is very similar, 48 years. In the US, which is a developed country, is 49 years. This means that if they, on average, retire at the age of 65 years old, there could be an overlap of 18 years in which they could still be productive and work, but they have to, if they provide childcare for their grandchildren, they have to share their time with them. And this, of course, can have an effect on their life cycle earnings and on their savings. And this adds to the fact that women face larger unemployment spells during their productive life because they get pregnant, they have children, they have to give birth, and then they have to take care of children during the early years. And it's mostly women who do this. So they opt out of the labor market more often and during longer periods than men. And this causes a problem for pension systems. Moreover, in pay-as-you-go system or market-oriented pension systems in which you retire with your own savings, right? Like when the state is not providing a good proportion of your retirements and you only retire with your special account you have in the bank, this is really a problem because you didn't work enough time to save enough for your retirement age. And this is worse for women, of course. And this could be even worse in developing economies with large informal markets, such as in Mexico, where 60% is informal labor, because they don't have access to these pension systems, not even the pay-as-you-go system. And so they have to just save as much as they can and then retire. And this causes the next problem. So the net pensions replacement rate in Mexico is 27%. It means that if you are earning on average during your productive life $1,000, when you retire, are going to be earning per month only $270 if you're a woman. It's not much better for men anyways. It's only $300 out of $1,000 on average when they retire. To make the comparison, Russia is 32% for women and 40% for men. So you can see the hand on the presentation, right? So if I move it, you can see something, or should I use
right, go ahead. Yeah, that's all right, please.
So Mexico is at the bottom of the distribution and net pension replacement rates in OECD countries, Russia is not an OECD country, but it's here. It also would be among the lowest 5 countries in terms of net pensions replacement rate. I don't know why Great Britain is there. It's really something I have to figure out. So definitely mothers' low labor force participation and grandmothers' low labor force participation could have a strong impact on their cycle of earnings and savings. So what we do in this paper is we exploit the timing variation of a policy extending primary school. The thing is that in Mexico, I'm going to go a bit ahead in my presentation. In Mexico, we do not have a very extensive system or network of childcare. And so we cannot really observe what is the benefits of having childcare or what is bad about not having childcare, because we don't have a system in the first place. So what we use is to exploit a variation of a policy which was not intended to provide childcare. It was intended to increase test scores for children by increasing the school day from 4 hours to 8 hours. But what we argue is that this works as an implicit large childcare subsidy because it releases time for mothers and grandmothers, for caregivers in general, for 8 hours every morning, every day. So we try to analyze the effect of this policy on outputs such as labor force and participation, employment, earnings in the formal and informal sector for poorer and for more and less educated mothers. So of course, I'm going to be a lot more detailed in a few minutes and regarding how we do this. Before I'm going to talk about the literature, what do we know so far is that there is large evidence on the effects of childbirth on mothers' labor force participation and how childcare policies alleviate restrictions and how this helps increase mothers, their participation and employment, their earnings. However, there isn't much research regarding grandmothers, despite they provide a lot of support to mothers taking care of children, and they could also be affected by grandchildren being born. There isn't much research on that. Only a handful of studies that show that grandparents, the presence of grandparents close to the residence of mothers increases mothers' labor force participation. And there's also evidence, this is all for developed economies, showing that becoming a grandparent reduces labor force participation, their own labor force participation, and the hours they work per week. Regarding studies evaluating the impact of childcare policies or childcare subsidies, to the best of our knowledge, there are only 2, one in the US, which is Ho in 2015, and she shows that giving childcare subsidies to 2,800 women in some states in the US increased 3 hours the hours that they were working, but these were already employed grandmothers. They just increased the time they were working at an intensive margin. But they didn't find effects on labor force participation. And a bit of the discussion in this paper is that, well, this is a developed country and they maybe they can afford, if they are old enough, not to go back to the labor market. They anyways have a decent life, but this could be different in developing or poorer economies. So the study for China of Lin in 2017, she exploits time and space variation of a childcare policy that gives free childcare in China, and she finds out that this increases 6.7 percentage points labor force participation in that country. So we complement the evidence with our study by focusing not only on working mothers, as Ho 2015 does, but also on unemployed women. And also we exploit time-space variation in the implementation of full-time schools. And so we relate more to the study of Lin 2017 in China, but we complement her research because we focus on elementary school most of the evidence on childcare is on preschool, at the preschool level, or for children who are 0 to 3 years old or 0 to 5 years old. Nonetheless, we focus on older children, 6 to 12 years. They still need childcare. They still need to be taken care of. And nonetheless, there isn't much evidence in general for this group of children. And we also complement the evidence because we use a panel data that is national representative. And we have 14 years of data that allows us to provide evidence on similar pre-trends that is going to give more robustness to our findings. So background on the full-time schools, the program started in 2007 in only 500 schools, but it quickly spread throughout the whole country and it reached 25,000 schools, which is around 60% of all eligible schools. The idea was to improve students' outcomes. A previous study I did is already published. I showed that it did have impact on test scores, but we're trying to exploit here a secondary or an unintended effect, which was childcare provision. So the schools in the program should have certain characteristics, but these are not really enforced. At the end, Mexico is a federation and the states, they have a lot of discretion of which schools can enter the program. And we have found out in previous studies that they are actually quite different. There are poorer schools, richer schools, bigger, smaller. So this causes a good variation that we can exploit. The full-time schools started originally in 2007. It was more likely that richer schools would enter the program, but this quickly changed. And now the program is present in 81% of all Mexican municipalities. We have 2,500 municipalities. Background on Mexican female labor force participation. We don't have many females participating in the labor force, regardless of their age. 45% of them participate. In the peak, it's 45%, but it decreases to 30% by the age of 60. So only 1 out of 3 women participate in the labor market. This is one of the lowest averages among OECD countries, and it's around the same percentage in countries such as Chile, which is a good comparison. And even more so, if a grandchild is present at any given age, the labor force participation is only 33%. And as I was mentioning, we don't have a strong network of formal childcare institutions. So only 4% of children are enrolled in formal childcare between the ages 0 to 6. And despite preschool is well spread and 81% of children participate in preschool, the problem is that this is part-time. It's as little as 3 hours per day. So it's not very useful in terms of time alleviation for caregivers. So as a consequence, grandmothers take care of 55% of children, of working mothers' children. They do it for at least 4 hours a day. And 88% of these grandmothers, they do not receive any payment from their daughters or sons who are giving them their children to be taken care of. The data we use our National Employment Survey, known as ENOE. We use administrative data of the full-time schools program, and we use data from the National Population Council in order to disentangle poverty effects. This is a dynamic panel data. It means that women are followed during 3 quarters, and then the sample is refreshed. And this, our sample is then working age grandmothers, aged 30 to 65, who are co-residing with their grandchild. Unfortunately, we cannot observe grandmothers if they are not living with their grandchildren. That's one of the drawbacks of our data. But I think we are computing the upper bounds of the effects, because these mothers are probably the most affected when there is a grandchild at home. So we match grandmother's information with our measure of exposure to full-time schools at the municipality level. These are some of the summary statistics. On average, in our sample, we have in low intensity municipalities, or the least exposed to the full-time schools program, they're on average 52 years. There's more or less the same in high intensity municipalities. And in terms of education, we can see a difference in favor of high intensity municipalities. And this difference is actually significant. And in general, in these descriptive characteristics of mothers and under participation in the labor market, there are previous differences in favor of high intensity municipalities, which are all statistically significant. Nonetheless, we don't need equality of averages for the strategy, identification strategy we're going to use. So for our identification strategy, one problem we faced is that we only observe school enrollment in full-time schools. And this can be correlated with mothers' labor force participation. If mothers are willing to participate in the labor market and they find out there is a full-time school in their municipality, they are more likely going to push to put their children in that labor and that full-time school because they are eager to go out and work. So enrollment is correlated with labor force participation. So what we do is that our treatment variable is the share of predicted capacity of the schools. So we take the average before policy introduction from 2001 to 2006, and then we use that average and we project that average towards 2007 to 2018. So that average is our proxy of school capacity, and we only change the proportion of children or the proportion of seats in those municipalities that are becoming full-time for all mothers. So this is a proxy, yes, of school capacity. And this is how it behaves across time and geographically. In 2007, 2008, where the program started in panel A, we have certain intensity of the treatment at the municipality level. You can see that at the state level, you're going to have municipalities with no treatment and some others with some treatment, some others more intensively. And this is increasing across time until it becomes more intense in 2017, 2018, but still with a lot of variation within states. That's a variation we exploit. So with this, we do a large difference design. It means within individual variation in access to full-time schools from the first quarter to the first quarter they appear in the employment survey. And of course, also the variation in their own employment status during these 5 quarters. So we subtract their status from their first quarter, we subtract the first quarter from the 5th quarter, and in both their employment status or their labor force participation and on their intensity of access to full-time schools. So this is mainly what is shown in this equation. So it's a 4-period difference in outcomes, grandmother's outcomes, and the difference in full-time's predicted share. We use time-fixed effects, and the differences also of some explanatory controls. And of course, our interest here is delta, our coefficient of interest that is going to give us the effect of childcare provision on grandmother's labor supply. So this is the cumulative effect during 5 quarters, and is the intention to treat. It's not the average treatment of the treated, because we're not observing children enrolled in full-time schools. We're only observing the exposure, a higher or lower exposure to the program. One of the suppositions in order to apply this strategy is that trends in labor force participation or employment were not changing before the program started to grow. They were not divergent. And what we show in this graph and for all the graphs in our outcome variables is that this tendency is very similar until we have a large intensity or large proportion of full-time schools in municipalities. And then we can observe a bit of a separation in low intensity municipalities in terms of labor force participation. And I can go now to the average results. So these are the effects on labor force participation of the increase in intensity or the increase in exposure to the program from 0 to 1, from not having any full-time schools to having all your schools in your municipality participating in the program. And what we observe is an increase, regardless of any specification we use, we have an increase of 12 percentage points in labor force participation. We use not only time fixed effects in these specifications, we also use cohort by time fixed effects. So we compare women who were born in the same year. We use education by time fixed effects in order to compare women with the same level of education. And we use youngest by time fixed effects, which is women who have, who their grandchildren, the youngest grandchildren is the same age. So we control for all these trends. And you can also observe that our lead 1 and lead 2 terms are not significant, offering support to our parallel trend assumption. The estimated effects on employment are quite similar and actually rather large, 11.2 percentage points increase in employment for grandmothers who are fully exposed to full-time schools in their municipality. But of course, only about 26% of municipalities have all their schools in the full-time schools program. Most of the municipalities are somewhere in the middle. So what I present here is the interpretation of the results given the average presence of full-time schools and the largest change in time in the provision of full-time schools to municipalities. So what we can observe here to the left is that many different municipalities were receiving the program and the intensity of the program was increasing across time. And at some point in time 0, there was a large increase for any given municipality in the provision of full-time schools. And then that large increase has an effect on labor force participation and unemployment, which is around 2 percentage points. So when the largest increase in a municipality is of 10% in the proportion of full-time schools, we have more or less 2 percentage points increase in labor force participation and employment. We also run regressions for income and for hours worked at the intensive margin, but we do not find effects for those variables. So robustness checks, and here is, it's going to start to get more interesting. So what we do is that we say, okay, if these results are only driven by the presence of full-time schools and not driven by any other circumstances happening in the labor market that is increasing employment for everyone, then women, grandmothers who don't have grandchildren, they shouldn't be affected by the full-time schools policy. If we find significant effects for these women, it would mean that something else is happening in the labor market that is increasing labor not only for exposed women, but for everyone. And what we actually find is that there are no significant effects for grandmothers without school-age grandchildren. We also do this for grandfathers with elementary school age children. So this gives us two things. One is that, yeah, the policy does not affect grandparents. Most of the effects go to grandmothers because they are the main caregivers. And also, it's good for us because it shows that nothing is happening in the labor market that is affecting either grandmothers without grandchildren or parents with or without grandchildren. And now we're going. I'm going to show you something that is rather new in the literature. So we were all very happy until 2019 when we had variation in timing in policies. We were all calculating differences in differences, staggered differences in differences when the treatment starts at different points in time for different treatment groups. And Goodman and Bacon in 2019, they showed that this actually poses a problem in terms of bias, because if you observe these differences in differences, let me see if I can draw here. I guess I can. Okay, let's draw arrows. So in normal differences in difference, when you just have a before and after, which is the canonical model, you would have this is a control group, right? And then you have a treatment group, which changes here. And you compare these two, you have parallel trends, and everything's fine. But when you have different timing in the treatment, here you have two control groups for this one here and this one here are the control groups of this treated group here, which is treated earlier, right? And then this group, which was treated earlier, also becomes a control group for these guys in the middle who were treated later. So these guys in the middle who were treated later have two control groups, which are those who were treated earlier and those who were never treated. And the problem is the next one. If the effects of the policy are different for each different group, for each different cohort, you are not going to have parallel trends in this one. If for this one the effect is higher than, for example, this one, you are not going to have parallel trends. So you would have to be testing parallel trends before treatment for all control groups, and parallel trends for all treated and untreated different subgroups you have across time, which is a big pain. And actually, Bacon shows that most of these differences in differences with variation in timing of the treatment are usually biased. So so he invented the Bacon decomposition in order to show the biases and where the biases are coming and which specific groups are biasing your results. So we conduct this Bacon decomposition. We cannot do it for the type of treatment we have, which is intensity of treatment. So we have to do it only in municipalities which were either treated, sorry, who were above the median of treatment and below the median of treatment, and they are 0, 1. So these results are not fully extendable to our findings, but they more or less tell us the next story, which is that when we make comparisons between municipalities treated at the beginning of the policy with municipalities treated at the end of the policy, we're actually biasing our results downwards. which kind of makes sense because these schools were very different. As I told you at the beginning, schools entering the program were a bit different. They were a bit richer than those who entered later to the program. Thankfully, most of those biases distribute in the same fashion around 0, positively and negatively. So there is not like a clear push downwards or upwards coming from these biases. Moreover, they don't have much weight in the weighted differences and differences we show. They are all low weighted. And most of the results we present come from the comparison of treated municipalities with never treated municipalities. And because the peak and decomposition is not very applicable to our kind of data, what we came out was with the idea of, okay, then if we don't want to observe different effects for difference of groups, let's run our overall average results for each year, taking out of our sample all the schools which entered the program in that specific year. So this, one of each of these bars is showing you our average result, but excluding the cohort of schools which were included in either 2011, 2013, 2015, and leaving all the other schools in the sample. And what we observe here is that yes, some standard errors become larger because in 2011 and 2015, many schools entered the program, and this affects the efficiency of our estimations. But what is important is that the point estimators are very similar across this combination of different cohorts entering the school. So we offer this as an evidence that we are not having the problem of once a school is treated, they more or less have the same effect regardless of the timing on which they are being treated. They have more or less the same effect on grandmothers, labor force participation, and employment. So now that I've presented the robustness checks, I can present more heterogeneous effects of this policy. We separate our sample by education and poverty, and we observe that these employment effects and labor force participation are better identified in women below the median of education, which is only 6 years in Mexico for older women. And they are better identified in high poverty regions. So the story that this is telling us is that income constraints are more important than opportunity costs, because if opportunity costs were too high, then more educated women in low poverty areas would be participating more in the labor market. But since apparently income constraints are very important, and poorer women with lower education are the ones which are being more affected by this change in the policy in schools. Then we do this for informal and the formal labor market. And what we observe is that, so we said that it was for lower educated mothers, which is 0 to 6 years here. And moreover, most of the effects of all the effects are in the informal labor market. The formal labor market does not show any economic nor a statistical significant change. And this is the same here. The effects are less well identified, but we observed that most of the average effects I showed you before are for poorer women are in the informal market, are happening in the informal market, whereas the formal market does not have a big variation and it's not significant. So So we do the same robustness checks. So grandmothers without elementary school age grandchildren, they are not showing any changes, neither in low poverty or high poverty areas. And these are grandfathers. Sorry, I forgot to change here the title of the graphic, but these are grandfathers, and grandfathers also do not show any big changes or significant changes because of the provision of implicit childcare, regardless of the type of job market and regardless of their poverty level. And so this is pretty much the discussion, is that our results are consistent with the literature showing that intergenerational childcare reduces employment of elder people and labor force participation. We contribute to the scarce evidence on this topic by showing that our results, by providing new results and also providing results that are similar to those found by Lynn, because she also didn't find effects for men. And our results are different because what she found is that her effects are higher for highly educated mothers and in richer areas. So the story in China seems to be more about opportunity costs, whereas in Mexico it seems to be more about budget constraints. So budget constraints are important, and this is if we consider that poorer women with lower education are increasing more the labor supply according to our results. And in general, the public childcare provision on female labor force participation extend the benefits that we found in the literature for younger women extend to older women, and this has an effect on potentially reducing economic and social costs for the elder, moreover, when they go out of the labor market to the pensions market. And I'm happy now to answer your questions.
Okay, thanks very much, Francisca. I haven't seen any questions asked in the chat section of this conference. People just introduced themselves, for which I would like to thank everyone. Now, question-wise, you still have the options to ask your questions using the chat, or you can raise hand if possible, because if you go to the bottom of the screen, you see participants. If you click on the participants, you will see an option, raise hand. So either way, please let us know if there are any questions. We'll start with the questions first, and then we'll go for comments. Questions, please. Raise hands. I do not see any hands raised. While you're thinking about asking your questions, Francisca, if you don't mind, a general question. What would be, if any, policy implications of your analysis? On the one hand, you argue that childcare, because grandmothers take care of their grandchildren, that reduces their labor force participation. But on the other hand, it allows greater participation in labor force of parents, of the mothers of the children. So there is a trade-off. Any ideas as to how this trade-off can be resolved? And I see a question by Bernardo, so please first, if you don't mind answering my question, and then we'll have Bernardo.
Yes, so definitely the low provision of public childcare is a problem, and I think that moreover, because there hasn't been any developed country which hasn't seen a massive increase in female labor force participation across time. So I think that this is a big problem in terms of general economic development if we don't have enough women participating on the labor force. So definitely public childcare provision, moreover in the country in which we have so low levels of this, would be the first main advice. And actually, the new president in Mexico just canceled the program of public childcare provision very recently. So we didn't have many, and now we don't have any. So these results show that they are important not only for young women, but also for elder women who are about to finish their productive life and enter the pensions market, which is also very precarious.
Okay, thanks very much. Bernardo, please, your question.
Well, I think it's somewhat related to your question. My doubt is, okay, of course, the best case scenario would be like for like public childcare to be available. But if a household needs to decide if to like, so okay, let's suppose that the daughter like becomes a mother, and then if they need to decide that either the mother like keeps working, which is probably she's at the start of her career, or like she stops working and the grandmother like keeps working. Like, can you see like which one is better? I mean, understanding that this neither of them is the ideal situation, but which is the least bad case?
Yeah, no, definitely decisions within households, economic decisions, there's bargaining and there is bargaining power. And my suspicion is that grandmothers don't have much bargaining power, and they don't have much of an option to say what they can do, what they want to do. So they just, also because of cultural role, they just tend to accept their destiny, that they have to take care of the grandchildren. This is not ideal, but in terms of household bargaining and finding optimal solutions within households, I think definitely it's a better option, because opportunity costs are higher for younger women who are probably more educated and who can make more money in the labor market. The problem is as I showed at the beginning, only 88% of grandmothers taking care of their grandchildren, no, not only, 88%, which is a big percentage, declare that they don't receive money from their daughters or sons, which are working. So yes, they go out and they work, but they do not provide more money to the grandmothers, and that's affecting their savings and their likelihood of being poor when they retire from the labor market. So another policy complementing the previous question, it's definitely transfers, direct transfers, or for pensions. As I know, in Chile, there is one transfer for every child, for every child women have, because they accept the fact that women have longer unemployment spells, that they go out more often of the labor market because they are childbearing. So for every children they have, they receive extra money when they retire from the labor market. So I think that's also a good option as a public policy.
Very good. Anyone else, please? Are there any other questions? Please raise your hands. Maria, yes, please.
Yes, asking in the chat.
Oh, we cannot hear you, Maria.
We can't
your
hear
mic is off, so please turn on the mic.
Yeah.
Okay, good, thanks.
Thank you, Francisco, for a very interesting and comprehensive story about Mexican situation. I just have two questions. I copied them in chat, but just to clarify how it looks like. My first question is that how decision-making in the household is organized actually about the labor market issues. You mentioned that grandmothers don't have any bargaining power. Why is that? And how they're like, who decides in the family who goes to the labor market, who stays at home, and why is that? So if comparative wages are important, so who earns more has all bargaining power, or there is some cultural predeterminants that like the most senior person in the family decides, or how it look like, and whether I just don't know the Mexican context, whether children stay with parents, say it's a grandmother household with younger generation staying, or is it that's a younger generation home with fathers and mothers staying with them, because that changes the context of bargaining power. And my second question would be is that if households knows in advance before they decide about children, whether they're eligible for child care system or not, because that might be also important in terms of endogeneity of the decisions. Thank you.
Okay, regarding the first question, there's not much evidence specific for Mexico about bargaining power and how economic decisions are taken inside households. If someone wants to write a paper with me on that, I would be very happy. But citing international evidence on the matter, definitely there are two things happening there. Those who earn more have more bargaining power. And in general, due to cultural circumstances, women, even if they are earning the same or more, they have less bargaining power. And so if we consider this evidence, this general evidence, I would say that I think there's more chance in Mexico that the decision of who goes to the labor market and who doesn't relies more on younger women who have a higher potential of earnings, higher earnings potential, and also husbands as well, of course. And can you repeat, please, your second question? Can you clarify that one?
Yeah, my second question is that whether the household, before making decision about having a child, knows or not whether they're going to be eligible for child care system or not, or they can only learn that after they have children.
Okay.
Yeah, so because this might create potential endogeneity and everything.
Sure. So yes, regarding the childcare, the formal childcare program we have in Mexico, which covers very little amount of mothers, I don't think they're thinking about that program because it's not available in most of the country. But regarding full-time schools, I think that because these are children who are 6 years old, the decision of having them happened like 7 years before the program actually started. And also this program develops very fast, very quick in time. So I think that women would have had to think very much in advance to start having children who would benefit from the full-time schools program. And the shock of the program is quite strong. It happens very quickly, develops across the country very fast. And I think that the children were already there when the program arrived. So that I think helps us with the identification strategy as well.
Okay, I see Bernardo has another question, right?
Of course, I cannot be happy only with one question.
Of course, right, yeah.
And well, this is a very random question, and but can you observe in the data like which grandmother is more likely to do this childcare? Because I mean, at least if I think in my family back in Chile, like usually like the grandmother on the mother's side of the baby is usually more likely to take on this childcare activities. Can you observe this with this data or not?
Yeah, yes, we can observe different things in the data, like a specific age. If they are, in this case, they are all mothers, not because they are co-residing with their daughters. What is important, we haven't tried is what Maria suggested, which is who is the house owner, right? if it's a daughter of, if it's the grandmother, because I guess that changes the bargaining power a bit. And we can identify that in our data. We wouldn't have many observations for one of those subgroups, which is grandmothers owning the house, I think. But anyways, we have to explore this. I think that's a good option in order to disclose these mechanisms more inside the households.
Okay, well, anyone else, please? I don't see any hands raised, but there is one more question. Oh, all right, so someone is leaving. Please, questions, comments? If there are none, Francisca, a very quick one, if you don't mind. It's not directly related to your topic, but still, is there any evidence of what is a better way to accumulate human capital if kids are attending, daycares or public schools or whatnot, or if they're raised by their grandparents? Because I see pros and cons. On the one hand, daycares and elementary schools would be more modern, but on the other hand, I think kids will have greater attention, more love, more, focus on education if they're brought up by grandparents. Any evidence on that?
Yes, there's a good amount of evidence showing that childcare provision is good for lower educated families, or with lower socioeconomic status. Because then the childcare and the professionals taking care of their children are better on average. But it's not very good when you have families with a high socioeconomic status or with a high cultural capital, because childcare professionals are on average less good, or they can transfer less knowledge or cultural capital to children. So that's why there's a lot of discussion about if this policy should be universal or should just focus on the poorer. And I think that the option is to focus those on the most disadvantaged areas in the country. But to start with, we should have at least some policy, which we don't have right now.
Well, because if I may continue real quick, in some countries, Canada is a notable example. Some groups of the population are considered as less advanced, say native population, Indians, quote unquote, First Nations. And in the 50s and the 60s, up until the 70s, there was a policy that kids were more or less by force taken out of these families and put in what is known as residential schools. And that was considered as a means to expedite their integration in the society and breaking out of these pockets of underdevelopment. But that policy is now very strongly rejected and condemned. There are public apologies brought by the Canadian government to the natives, where kids were taken by force. So it's a very controversial topic, but what you said makes a lot of sense. So because the human capital in these daycare facilities is not that great, maybe it really depends. So it could be discretional and contingent. Maria, please.
Yeah, thank you. I think that Leonid raised really interesting and important issue about the effect of human capital accumulation in the model, because really, like when you stay with your child, it's not like spending time; it's also investing in the human capital. And so far, the model doesn't capture that. So, like the quality of childcare, and I think that there might be probably some non-linear effect, in the sense that childcare services, they provide like medium quality. So if you are from really poor family, it's better for you to be on the childcare. But if you're really from a very rich family, it's better for you to stay with your grandma who has like social capital, higher social capital, human capital, and everything. And I think what might be also missing in the model is that if you're in a rich family, you can also have private tutors and extra classes for your children. And if you're in the like full-time care, those classes are provided in the package. But if you stay at home, your grandmom can take you somewhere like, for example, my grandmother took me to the swimming pool twice per week. and also for language teacher because I couldn't pronounce like some sounds, and also for figure skating 3 times per week, and one day we were on like my drawing lessons. So that was extra investment, and they were possible because my grandma took me there. So, and there is basically a bias toward more rich family who can also pay for that. So, in my case, and in many other cases, the idea was not, it's not like only spending time, but also investing extra and working as an intermediary for extra human capital investment. So I do understand you that you have like basic model, but as an extension, that would be really great to at least to discuss the issues that Leonid have raised. I think it's a really important one. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I think that probably with the data at hand, we cannot proxy. The most we can do is separate results by mother's education, grandmother's and mother's education, but we can at least include this discussion and how it might interact with our results in the discussion of the paper. Okay,
Timur has a question, I think.
Yes, thank you. Actually, it's related to Maria's point. I just wanted to ask about are there any evidence for heterogeneous effects on different types of families? You showed that there's a different effect for poor and rich families, but also in terms of like number of children in a family or single mothers who don't have, who like have to work by themselves and support the family. Do you have any evidence of heterogeneous effects?
Yeah, we haven't. We have that information. We can capture that with a survey. But we have tried some of those heterogeneous effects. The problem is that the more subgroups, so very specific subgroups we use, we lose a lot of efficiency. Like at least here in this results, only separated by median of education below and above the median. Before the results were significant at the 95% level, then they go just to the 90%. And if the subgroups are really small, then we observe positive coefficients, but they are no longer significant. That's a problem with our data. We could do more when we were exploring effects of childcare on mothers, young mothers, single, married. We had more opportunity to explore subgroups because we had like 500,000 observations. So that's very good for standard errors. But in this case, that's a problem we face. We have tried some of these, but they just don't come out significant.
Okay, thank you. Bernard, I still see your hand raised, but is it for the previous question or you still have another one?
No, I don't have any further questions.
Okay, all right. Anyone else, please? I don't see anyone in chat, and I do not see any hands raised, which suggests to me that we've exhausted our questions and comments, and what remains to be done is to thank Francisco very much for his presentation. Let's give him a round of applause. Let's try to do it online.
Thank you.
And other than that, we'll have our next seminar in a week, right, Stas? Can you remind us what?
Yes, correct. We are having the seminar next week at the same time, and Riccardo Camboni from the University of Padova is going to present his paper on the public procurement and experimental data.
Excellent. So make sure to attend this one as well. Thanks very much, everyone. We'll see each other again very soon.
Thank you.
Thanks again to Francisca. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Bye.